Well, welcome to the Way of Things. Today we're going to talk about an interesting and controversial subject, and that is Bigfoot. Now, Bigfoot has been a myth or reality, however you want to look at it, that's been going along for perhaps 1,000 years or more. The Indians, of course, called him Sasquatch, and it's something that people have pondered for a long time. Nowadays, when people talk about it, some people use the term cryptobiology or cryptobiologist. And I think we're all kind of a cryptobiologist. Of course, crypto meaning like something that's encrypted, mysterious, needs to be interpreted. And biology is, of course, the science of life, the study of life, the scientific study of life. And I think we all have a feeling that there's a mystery to life, and we are curious and want to know about it. But if we're going to try to understand Bigfoot, we have to try to understand it in either a scientific manner. I think it's the only way we have, and there is some science to it. And so we have to differentiate between something that is beyond science, and that is if Bigfoot can vanish into a alternate universe or has come from outer space or something, then really biology really doesn't have much to say about that. It leads to basically a dead end. On the other hand, if Bigfoot is something that is either an ape, maybe a bear-like creature, but basically an animal made of DNA and follows the natural course of living. It breathes air, it eats, and so forth. Then I think we can look at it and use both the reports that describe it to bracket it to some degree as to what it is or isn't, or what it can and can't do. And then we can use the other animals and the environment to also understand the possibilities that are out there. And so with that, we can start with what is and what isn't Bigfoot. And to start with, if we find an animal, a 20-pound monkey that is in the Pacific Northwest that say weighs 20 pounds and has a prehensile tail, well, that isn't Bigfoot. It just isn't. Bigfoot is at least 6 foot tall by all reports, bipedal, as much as 9 feet tall in some cases, has a ape or human-like face, is hairy, and those descriptions are pretty consistent. And it seems as though he has large feet, even for his large size. In proportion to his body size, by all reports, very large feet. So these are things that we can kind of take a look at and then measure them and explore them and see where they actually end up. So one of the things that we want to do as we look at Bigfoot, we can compare him to other animals. Now, one of the animals that most people know the best, and so we can compare him and we'll all have kind of an idea what these animals can do, and that is the dog. Most people have some understanding of what a dog is and can and can't do and so forth. So if we look at the dog, one of the things we can see is the dog, of course, is related to the wolf. It's a canine. And a dog is a running machine. I mean, that's one of the things that the dog does. There's 4 basic aspects that a dog is. He can run, he can smell, he has good hearing, and he has a special relationship with human beings. Those are the 4 major categories that differentiate a dog from most other animals. So starting with the ability to run, the dog can run like really few animals can. First of all, he's four-legged, and a four-legged animal, when they run, of course, they're using their hind legs like a human or a Bigfoot would use, but they're also using their front limbs. They're using the muscle and the strength of their front limbs to propel them. And what this does is basically give more muscle mass to the occupation of running, so that when a human's running, not only do they not have the use of their arms to propel them, but they have to carry them. You have to carry your arms as dead weight. And a Bigfoot would have the same situation. He would have the same way of running and having to carry his arms, not doing him any good as far as running. The other thing, a dog, when he runs, he has a cardiovascular system that's very much set up for running. He can run because he has a body shape that in a heart and lung situation that's set up for that. Humans really aren't that way. Now, it's when we go to Bigfoot, we don't know what he has for hearts and lungs, but if he's based on an ape, he's probably not got the same system a dog has. Now, another thing a dog has is he has a relatively compact digestive system because he's a predator. And as a predator, he eats higher energy food. And that food needs less processing, and so he doesn't have to carry as big a processor. A deer is an example of a running machine, but of course a deer is a herbivore. It eats plants, grass, and fairly low quality plants. A deer will eat wheat and stuff like that when it gets a chance, but it can make it on grass and leaves, which are relatively low in energy. But because of that, a deer has to carry along this really complex and large digestive system when it runs, and it weighs it down. Now, a deer still can have a tremendous bolt of speed, and it's quite incredible. But eventually, a dog, given a chance, a good shaped dog, a good running dog, will run down a deer, will outdo it. It's just the way it is. It's just the way that the math ends up. So with a running machine like a dog, we can, with a fair degree of certainty, say that this dog will outrun not only a human. That's pretty obvious. Anybody that owns a dog that's really in good shape and can run will really see that these dogs can outdo any human. And with that, we can say that it'll probably outrun any Bigfoot that's alive. Now, having said that, the one thing that the upright, stance does give a person, and no doubt Bigfoot, and even animals that are not as upright like bears, that can only get upright for a while. The one advantage that does give you is the ability to climb things like a tree or a very steep cliff or something that otherwise would be impossible for a dog. So while you can't outrun a dog, you can outclimb a dog, and no doubt Bigfoot can do the same. So that's something that we can kind of bracket. If there is Bigfoot, he's very unlikely that he can outrun a dog. Now, the next thing we want to understand about a dog is we're going to talk a little bit about their hearing. Now, a dog's hearing is very keen and often overlooked, even though once in a while you hear people talk about it. But when you're listening or talking about what a dog can and cannot hear, we have to be careful not to oversimplify it. When a dog can hear, it's incredible. And you got to understand, he's got ears that are forward, that he can move a bit, almost like a radar, a hunting kind of for where a sound is. he can hear things in that sound because he's got a mind that is associated with that sense. So even if we somehow hear something, like we have a magnified, say we have a microphone to pick up a small sound, we don't really read into that sound everything that a dog can, because a dog's mind is meant for that precise hearing. One of the prime examples that I've ever seen of that is one time I was videoing an area near a spring, and a coyote came up, and you could hear him or see him. We could see him pick up on a sound, and he jumped about 6 feet. With the arc of that jump, he must have been 5 or 6 feet in the air as well, maybe moving 7 or 8 feet. And he came down on a mouse with both feet. And of course, that's only an area maybe about that big with both of his feet together. But he hit that mouse, and we know he got it because we could see him eat it in the field of view. So this coyote was able to, in pitch dark, this was in complete darkness, hear the sound, recognize it as a mouse, because he'd have been in bad way if that had been a rattlesnake or a snake moving through the grass. And then jump, and he had the nervous system and the mind to control his body in this arc and hit exactly where that sound is. And so when we talk about a dog understanding sound, we have to understand it as more than just an elevated hearing. So when a dog, people know this who know their dogs, they'll start barking or something and know either somebody's coming, and oftentimes even recognize it just by, they can tell by the steps or where that is, or whether it's a threat or not a threat, or they're just getting excited about it. So as fantastic as the hearing is of a dog, it's unlikely that a Bigfoot's hearing is anywhere near that. He's a primate. He doesn't have ears that are cupped out and forward. And so it's unlikely that Bigfoot has the hearing of a dog. Now the next thing that we want to talk about as far as dogs, because we have dogs in the forest, we have people in the forest, and of course we're trying to discern, do we have Bigfoot in the forest? And one of the things that, of course, dogs really have is a sense of smell. And that sense of smell is also on a level that is difficult for some humans to really understand. If you've ever hunted with dogs, birds or bears or wild boar or something, you begin to understand that on a very deep level. In fact, I would even go so far as to say, if you've never really hunted with dogs, you really don't know, you've never really had that relationship at that 100% level. And the sense of smell is part of it. And that sense of smell is, again, not just elevated. It's not that they can just smell things that we can't. It's that they have a mind, a body, and a nervous system set up to react, respond, and process that sense. For instance, a dog, you can be walking along, say in a pine forest where Bigfoot would often live, and the ground is covered with pine needles. And anybody who's walked across pine needles knows that you really don't leave a footprint or anything. But yet a dog can come across a scent trail, recognize not only the animal, indeed, those that track humans, they can actually track an individual human. You can have 10 people, in an area, give a dog a scent to say, here's a shirt or something that this person's wore, and he'll pick out that individual human and say he went this way. Even though that track might be going for miles and he's just cut across it, he knows the direction of travel. So the level of sensory perception that a dog has in its sense of smell really borders on almost like vision. Imagine that dog can see that scent trail and say that it went that way. That's the way that animal went or that person. So with that, we can again look at humans and say that humans have no consciousness of that. A human will walk past that scent trail absolutely oblivious to it being there, whereas a dog simply can't miss it. Now, again, we don't know where the sense of smell is for Bigfoot, but if he's any kind of a primate with a relatively flat face, meaning he doesn't have a snout, because that's one of the reasons why a dog can smell, is he's got this huge sense organ in his snout that picks up these fine scents. And then, of course, a nervous system based on that, and then a mind that's used to calculate and recognize these subtleties that are extremely subtle, but make a difference. It's unlikely that Bigfoot has that capacity, simply because he's a primate and simply because he doesn't have, nobody describes him with a big, long snout or muzzle, but more of a flat human-type face. So there again, the dog has a superior view in the environment than the human or the abilities, we can say, of Bigfoot. And lastly, one of the things that the dog has is something that you could write volumes on, and we'll only touch on it, but that is, he has a relationship with humans, an intellectual relationship that is perhaps 35,000 years old. Of course, humans have evolved and changed not only their bodies, but the very minds of dogs. And dogs are an animal that can communicate back and forth with a human really like no other animal, and do so. A dog can follow a point. You can point to something and a dog will look at that item. You can yell at a dog and he'll actually feel emotions like embarrassed or shame or fear, and he can respond to, if you've been gone a long time, he's happy to see you, and you know that he's genuinely happy and that he genuinely wants to tell you that he's happy to see you. So this is something, a dynamics that when you're out in the field with a human being and a dog, they become this compound predator, this compound entity that has an awareness that is simply supernatural, really. For instance, the dog can actually tell you that, hey, I've got a hold of this scent and this animal or this person's going off this direction. But yet, if you're moving, let's say, up into the wind, and let's say you're hunting wild boar, and you look off to the right and you see, well, there's big boar tracks going right up the side of the hill there. I can see them. They're just 30 feet away. Well, you can point to the dog, and the dog will look at them, but the dog, even though it's in his visual field, those tracks mean nothing to him. Zero. But if you point to him and tell him to go over there, he'll go over there. Or if you walk over there, he'll say, come here. He'll come to you. Catch that scent and follow it. He's on it. This is the kind of thing that make the dog now as if he had vision, human vision, where he doesn't. And then the human as if they had scent, because maybe there's only a set of trail or footprints for maybe 30, 40 feet as it gets out of the gully, and then you're onto the pine needles again. Whereas a human being would be stuck. Like, okay, I know this boar went up this hill, but now where'd he go? The dog can follow. What the dog can't do is he's going to follow as if he was on rails, whereas the human has a map in their mind. They can say, over this hill there's a creek, there's a cliff along the base of this hill that a wild boar can't get by, or all these kind of things, or is this too thick for me, so we got to try to move this animal this way, because if he gets into this thicket a mile from now, we'll never get him. All this kind of planning. The human not only has this map in his mind and can utilize it, but he understands it through time. He understands past, present, and future, the likes of which the dog has no chance of doing it. but with the dog and the human together, they bring these two properties together. So regardless of where Bigfoot is in this whole system, whatever attributes he has, it's unlikely that he has these supernatural components of the dog-human together. For instance, we know that primitive people, when they met modern people, very quickly picked up on certain things. They would use tin cans for cooking. They would quickly realize that a metal knife was superior to stone. They would use a tarp to make a shelter, all kinds of things like this. Well, we know that Bigfoot doesn't seem to do this. There's no reports of Bigfoot wielding an axe or a knife. There's no reports of him building up a shelter with a tarp or carrying along a ice chest for months at a time to utilize for storing food or something. We just don't have these. So Bigfoot might be more intelligent than, say, a gorilla. We don't know. If he exists, he could have superior intelligence to a gorilla, but it's very unlikely that he has any kind of intelligence bordering on human. So with that, we end up with this animal that can't match the performance specs of a dog and is unlikely to match some of the performance specs of a human. And while he might outdo one or the other, he might have, say, more intelligence than the dog, he doesn't have than the human. And he might have better sense of smell than the human, but not as good as the dog. And we could go on through these different attributes like that. But the point is, he can't match the dog-human combination. And with that, we know that there are people throughout the world that still hunt with dogs, and that this is a very powerful means of hunting, and it gets you deep into the understanding of the environment, very deep into the understanding. Because a human that's hunting with dogs knows where scent trails are. He knows where animals walk, even though there's no game trail, there's no footprints. He knows that along this hillside, down through these trees, there's often deer or often boar or bear going through this area because the dog tells him so. And it's a way that only a person working with dogs would know that. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Talk to anybody that really hunts with dogs, and you'll see that they know the environment on a level that's really hard for them to even describe properly to a person that doesn't know the language and the experiences that it brings. And this makes it next to impossible for them, for a person that knows how to hunt with dogs, to not capture on a fairly regular basis Bigfoot. Now, we can go into whether, Bigfoot would often escape. He could climb a cliff where the dog couldn't get to, and he might be able to outrun humans every day, but not the dog. He may have some pretty good tricks up his sleeve because, like any animal does, know where to run, cut across water, slither through some brush that only he can get through and the dogs can't for some reason. Maybe the brush is stick low and he can climb over the top of it or something like that. He'll have tricks, but he won't get away 100% of the time. And those dogs and that human that knows his dogs will know that there's something out there. And of course, one of the many reports that keep coming over time and time again about Bigfoot, regardless of what you think of the credibility, is that Bigfoot basically stinks. It has a pretty strong odor, to put it maybe more, politely. And with that, of course, the dogs could literally smell him a mile away. And I mean an actual measured mile. If he was really a smelly animal, those dogs could just you'd let him out of the truck and they'd just bing, he's over there. Mile away through the woods, didn't matter. So with that, I'd like to close that while Bigfoot is mysterious and he's changed through history, we do have ways of understanding whether he can exist or doesn't exist or does. And I hope that through this discussion that not so much that you believe one way or another, but your level of understanding has increased. And not just with the regards to whether Bigfoot exists or not, but it gives you a window into understanding the environment as a whole, regardless of whether you're trying to understand birds or bears or coyotes or what have you. And with that, I thank you very much.